Welcome to Sharing Sox, our somewhat into September edition. I am Southside Sox duty geezer Leigh Allan. With me, my son and West Coast correspondent Will. And for those of you on audio and not video, behind Will is a picture of the Big Hurt himself, because Will's going to turn 35 on Friday. And of course, that is the most famous 35 in White Sox history, one of the most famous 35s in all sports history. I think it'd be right up there.
I think so. I was trying to figure out.
Ricky Henderson had that. That's kind of a match right there. It's also a 35, but there have been very few. Oddly enough, because you would have thought running backs. You would have thought there'd be a lot of famous running backs.
Kevin Durant was 35 for a while.
Kevin Durant was.
He has now switched to number 7. So he's a big 35. But yeah, Frank Thomas is. Whenever, and I know we're from Chicago, so it's a little biased, but whenever you say 35th birthday, people say Frank Thomas birthday. The baseball fans do. So, yeah, Big Hurt coming for you.
Yeah, and he's amazingly, given that early in his career, I don't think he was a well-spoken guy. I tend to be grumpy and a lot of other. He's great on TV.
he's really good. You know, I gotta say, I've never had any interest in any over-the-counter testosterone-based products, but Frank Thomas's pitch for Nugenics almost has me sold, because the guy's doing great. He's aging well, so maybe we should all be taking Nugenics, whatever the hell that is.
Okay, well, that's good. We're gonna Will wants to get into bulks, because apparently that came up. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon. That came up Tuesday night's game, long after I was asleep, because it was West Coast game. And it's something called the intentional till Balk came up. I have a little Balk story that I'm still confused about many decades, well, not many decades, but a decade or two after it came. But first, I want to talk about pitching. Last night, Tuesday night, of all amazing things, Jimmy Lambert pitched well. Pitched very well.
Very well.
5 innings of 1-run ball. But what's more amazing than the 5 innings of 1-run ball is he did it on 70 pitches. Now, that's an average of 14 pitches an inning, which is kind of an ideal. I mean, you look at how many pitches? 14 is really great. Well, it turns out 15 is really great these days. 14 used to be really great, but there's more selective. 3 true outcomes, blah, 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 drags it out. So we get more pitches per inning. The best in the majors is Adam Wainwright at 14.7.
Wow.
So having a pretty good year.
That's the best? Wow.
That's the best. The best in the American League is Zach Wheeler at 14.9. There are only about 3 guys under. Now, an interesting thing that I found out looking up this stuff is how few pitchers are what we call qualified this year. To be a qualified pitcher, meaning qualified for the Cy Young Award, you have to have 1 inning pitched for each of your team's number of games, so 162 innings. Now, you figure 30 teams, almost every team has, I think every team has a 5-pitcher rotation, starting rotation, occasional fill-ins, but 5 rotations. So that's 150. Of those 150, only 45 are qualified pitchers as of yesterday when I looked this up. And that's because, if you only throw 5 innings and you only throw every 5th day, you can't miss a turn or you're not qualified. And that's a lot of that going on. Even if you go 6 innings, you better not miss more than 1 or 2 turns along in there, or have 1 bad game where you leave in the 3rd.
This is actually interesting because I'm going to speak to this point real quick before you keep going. Someone came back and responded to me, not mean or anything, on Twitter, because I was talking about the overworking of the pitchers. And somebody came back like, "Oh, you're wrong, because Lynn and Rodon don't even qualify as starters this year. They don't even count at the rate that they're going." And I was like, that's true based on innings. But if you look at number of pitches thrown, Lynn is in the top 50, Rodon's in the top 75. So it tells you a lot that they are not qualified in terms of innings but they would be in terms of pitches thrown, which I think only bolsters our pitchers are overworked argument that these
And
guys are
they're
only
over.
going 5 innings and they're still throwing
Absolutely.
100 pitches.
I agree with us on this. So you get Garrett Cole, and you'd say, well, all right, Sox pitchers throw a lot because they strike out a lot of people. Zach Wheeler leads the league in strikeouts, and he's at 14.9. Garrett Cole is all the way up to 16.1. I looked at Zach Greinke as the idea of an old pro, although Wainwright certainly fits that as well, and where he is, and then he's at 15.06, so right around 15. But out of the 45 qualified pitchers, we have 3. And Lynn and Rodon are not any of the 3. The best for the Sox is 35th. Lucas Giolito averages 16.51 pitches per inning. That's 35th out of 45. Dallas Keuchel, granted, not as much wear and tear on the arm, but 37th at 16.57. And dead last in all major league pitchers who would qualify for the Cy Young or whatever award, Dylan Cease, by quite a margin at 17.777.
I'm going to throw you another stat real quick that I just our brains must have been on the same wavelength this week as father and son, because I was actually falling down stat rabbit holes about this sort of same thing. Dylan Cease has thrown the 5th most pitches in the majors this year. Lucas Giolito has thrown the 7th most pitches in the majors this year. That is wild.
And that goes back to my stat that the Sox pitchers to go from pitches to innings. No, it is pitches. They've thrown 100 or more pitches in a start far more often. When I look, this goes back sometime it was 38 and numbers will be over 40 now, but far more than anybody else. It was like 38 to 31, which was second place. That was the Reds. And the league average was 15. So the pitchers have really been heavily used. And do we see a problem with that right now? Well, we certainly see a problem with Carlos Rodon. It's surprising, and to his credit, we have not seen it really with Dylan Cease because he's already pitched more innings than in the last 2 years combined. Lynn and Giolito, of course, have been heavily used when they were 60 games last year, but still heavily used in rotation and whatnot. But they too, Giolito's injury obviously has nothing to do with overwork. I mean, that was just freak accident of stepping wrong when he was trying to throw. Lynn, I think Lynn's could be, because he had 2 different things. First we go to the shoulder, and then we go to the knee. Well, maybe the knee's because the shoulder was hurt and he's stepping funny, or they're doing something out of the usual in his motion. I really worry, and I think it's a good thing. And somehow we won with the Jimmy Lambert game, which is great. But I think it's a good thing that these guys are on the IL now, or in Rodon's case, not strictly on the IL, but for all practical purposes, the IL, because he's been out for a couple of turns. I think it's a very good thing. There was last night during the portion before I went to sleep, Stoney and the god awful. God Beckham was a terrible baseball player. I mean, by major league standards, he is a worse announcer. Beckham is a terrible announcer. But they got into, well, it's really important to get the home field advantage because with Houston, the situation. So Sox are the worst. They're 500 on the road this year, and that includes sweeping Baltimore and Texas and a bunch of other things. They're the worst road team by far of anybody who's got any likelihood of making the playoffs. Flip side of that is they're the best home team by far of any team that's likely to make the playoffs. Maybe not by far over Tampa Bay, but over anybody else. So yeah, you've got that, balance it out. Do we use our pitchers? Do we go for the home field? You and I have talked before. We both agree it's more important that our pitchers be rested, that our starting pitchers all be able to pitch in the postseason for one thing, but that they be in good shape when they do it.
I stand by that as well. I think if you talk about a scenario where you're trying to get home field, so you keep pitching all these guys. It doesn't matter if you're home, if your pitchers have nothing left. It truly does not matter. If you go in hobbling, it doesn't matter if you're the home team or the road team. It just doesn't. If we have to throw Jimmy Lambert and Ronaldo Lopez in early playoff games because our other guys are hurt or beat down, we're out. We're just
We
out.
can't even throw Jimmy Lambert. He's not eligible.
Exactly. So it is a situation where I think 100% you still have to rest these guys. They have been overworked. I know that I am not wrong about this because the LaRussa stands on Twitter have not defended Tony overworking the pitchers as much as they defend him on everything else on the planet. And it is a huge concern. Now, the plus side is we have a big lead. We're getting good games out of Ronaldo Lopez and Jimmy Lambert, so we can rest these guys. I don't think you sit them all for the rest of the year, of course, but I think we're at September 8th. The season's going to end what, October 3rd or something like that?
Yeah.
And so you got a little under a month. I honestly think you throw Keuchel for all of his starts because you're not going to use him in the playoffs. So just use him to eat up innings. You pitch Lopez, you pitch Lambert when you can, and those are the three guys that you are going to throw the most during the month of September. Then fill in
I wish
with the other four.
I really miss Steve Stone on his Rosh Hashanah break, and I think he should be back tonight. Maybe I think Rosh Hashanah ended Tuesday night, because I would love to see his pitcher's interpretation of some of the things that happened in the past week. Notably, what has gone on with Michael Kopech. I wrote, I happened to cover that game where Kopech was pretty much annihilated, and it just happened a few times. And I wrote he looked tired, and somebody in the comment section, fair comment, goes, well, he's throwing 99. How could he be tired? I don't think, yes, you can lose miles off your fastball if you're tired, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything if you're at the same speed, because he looks, when he's good, what we might call easy heat, the kind of thing you associate more with lefties. I associate it, well, historically with Sandy Koufax, but for White Sox, more recently, Matt Thornton. Matt Thornton never looked like he was doing anything but playing catch. And yet
Chris Sale's a good example too.
And Sale kind of comes flying off the mound though, but afterward. Sure. But Kopech just looks that same way. It was just ease. It's 100 miles an hour, and I'm just cruising. He didn't look like that. He hasn't looked like that the last few times. It looks like I'm throwing hard, which means you're not throwing with the same accuracy.
Yeah, it means your command is not the same as it was before. So I totally agree with you about Kopech being tired. Yes, you could still throw 100 miles an hour if you're tired. You're just not going to throw it effectively. And big leaguers can hit 100-mile-an-hour pitches if they're not thrown effectively. There's really no speed of pitch that a major league hitter can't hit if it's not moving. They can hit anything that's coming in on a straight line. Their instincts and their reaction times are so ingrained in them at this point. The thing is, if it moves even an inch or 2 inches at 100 or 101 or 99, then it becomes extremely difficult. And sometimes with Kopech, we see him throwing 100 miles an hour that's moving 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches. And that's what made him look like, everyone says like he looks like a video game guy, because they let you control the ball like that in video games. And he had that kind of control. Well, now I think he's gassed. So he's having to put so much more into just getting the speed that it's making him put the ball in places that it's a lot easier to hit, or he's throwing the ball out of the strike zone. So I think you can be absolutely gassed and still throw 99 miles an hour. It's not necessarily just about speed. It's about command and control. And he's losing that. And it's not Kopech's fault. He's barely played baseball for the last few years. So it's definitely a situation where he is, pitching in the summer heat. The heat this year has been relentless, it feels like, but not only on the West Coast, but all over the country. And we don't have the humidity here. Um, but it's definitely one of those things where these guys are just flat out tired. And that's not the way you want to go into October. You don't want to go limping across that finish line. You want to go soaring across it. And if that means you eat dirt for, the next 10 days, then you do it. And you throw a bunch of slubs and you bring up guys from Charlotte who otherwise would never have pitched in a major league game. You do whatever you can to rest these starters and even some of the relievers. And if you lose these games, you lose these games. I think home field advantage for us at this point feels unrealistic in a lot of ways. So I
Well, it's
think
only a game difference, and Houston has a tougher schedule.
it's
So
true.
there's
It's
some
true.
room.
But I think it's unrealistic in that we have all of our pitchers going on the IL all the time just to get them back up to speed. And I think at some point you do have to make the decision, okay, we're going to try for home field or we're going to try to have a completely healthy rotation on October 4th. And I would absolutely take the latter. You're nothing without those pitchers. The White Sox cannot win without those pitchers. Absolutely not. They're going to be going up against some very, very tough rotations, and they need to be rested and ready. They have to be pitching at their absolute best in October, and I think that will offset, some of the discrepancies we're seeing here. But let's take a quick break, and we will come back. I want to talk a bit about something Jason brought up last night, which is intentional balks, which, our lovely guest announcer, Gordon Beckham, who, is terrible, was as surprised as I was as I was hearing it live to hear that this is a trend now. So we will take a quick break and we will come back just a second on Sharing Sox. All right, welcome back to Sharing Sox. We spent some time talking about our pitchers who we spent most of this season actually on this podcast praising how they're all healthy and they're all doing well and no one's tired and now they all seem to be pretty gassed.
Let me very quickly before you get into the subject you want, because I didn't bring up Lynn and Rodon, who are not qualified, but I did the math. I put numbers down and divided and everything. They are worse in pitches per inning than Keuchel and Giolito, who, remember, were near the bottom. They're better than Cease, so they're not at the bottom, but they're 16.67, 16.72, Rodon and Lynn, respectively. And you're just talking one pitch an inning, but boy, it adds up. One and a half, two pitches in Cease's case over the low stretch.
And you also have to keep in mind that those are guys who were not throwing that many pitches earlier in the year. So while you're saying, 16.7, they're probably in the last 2 months at around 18. And it's just offset.
It seems so often that a Sox pitcher is in the fifth and he's on pitch 95.
It's every game. It's every game now. I mean, it legitimately is. You're watching Sox games right now wondering if the starter makes it through 5. And that's a really bad place. That's a really dangerous place to be in September.
Balks. Let's go to Balks.
All right. So this is interesting. And I thought it was a weird topic that you would find interesting to talk about today. So Jason mentioned that pitchers have been intentionally balking players in extra innings. And so the scenario is, that we have a runner on second. And when the visiting team has scored more than their pretty much given run that we give people now in extra innings in the 10th, if they come out and they score, 3 or 4 runs, then the pitchers in the bottom half of the inning have been intentionally balking the runner on second over to third at the beginning of the inning so that they don't have to change their signs.
That's great.
Isn't that wild? And Beckham, as well as I, we were both sitting there going, intentional balks? What? And it is
What? I mean, they
100%.
got that little thing in their hat, and they can't look at the little thing. I mean, until they
They got
ban
their
that thing,
hat
which they
thing.
should. Until they
Yeah.
ban looking in your hat to see, oh yeah, if there's a guy on second, it should be the third sign. I mean, until they ban that, what difference does it make?
Well, I think there are some valuable things to it. As a former pitcher who was, of course, nowhere near major league level, but I had to experience similar situations. If I'm up by 4 and I need 3 outs and there's a guy on second, if I send him over to third, I don't really have to care about him anymore.
No,
I don't have to hold him. I don't have to spend time pretending I'm gonna
you can do
throw
a
to
windup
second.
if you want.
You can do a windup. It actually gives you a lot of advantages. And in the era in which sign stealing is apparently just a massive issue, I feel like we add 15 minutes to every Major League Baseball game right now, just from catchers coming out and saying, no, no, I was on this set of signs. Well, pull out your card. No, see, I was on that one. Oh, you're on that one? I was doing this one. No, we got to do this one. And then the catcher goes back, and then the pitcher calls off 2 pitches, and then the catcher comes back out and says, no, 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 you were on this one. I was on this one. I think it's really interesting. And I gotta say, I like the move because if you're up 4 runs, who gives a crap about that guy on second? If you're up 3 runs, who gives a crap about that guy on second? If he is going to mess with your head and mess with your signs or cause you to have to pitch from the stretch instead of a windup, get him over to third. Who cares? He doesn't matter as a run. I would much rather have the guy on third and know that I can bring my best stuff for the rest of this inning than to be hung up with all those looks over to second, which, for Sox pitchers these days are meaningless anyway. They're never going to pick anyone off there. So I was wondering what you think
They're,
about
they're
the
never going to hold
intentional
anybody
balk.
there.
Never going to hold anyone. Never.
Yeah, that is a real weakness of both our starters and relievers is holding people on. It goes on the catcher's record and all that, but the poor catchers, they don't have a chance.
No.
These guys are gone. Interesting, a couple of things on balls. We had a ball called on somebody the other night. Matt Foster, maybe?
Yeah, it was Foster.
For doing a little tiny forward step, which is illegal. I mean, it was a proper ball call. But it's interesting that he does it, that he did it. Why, who knows? But one of the things that it led me to, because it was kind of a jittery thing rather than a real deception move, is that so many pitchers that you see now, and I think Hendricks does this, we have guys who do it, but I've seen many opponents do it, and I don't remember it historically, come down to the theoretically set position. And they're like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I'm so nervous, I'm throwing a baseball. Well, they're not really so nervous they're throwing a baseball. They're cheating because what they're doing is messing with the batter's timing. Yeah, maybe they'll do it even if it's just a stretch and not a guy on base. That messing with the base runner, that's illegal. The whole idea of the set position is that you are set for a second.
Well, and they have become extremely lenient on what constitutes a second. Because you look at guys like James Karinchak on Cleveland, and he gets up there, and it's different every time, always moving, and his knees are going, his knees are moving, his hands are moving, and then his second is about this fast. That's all it is. Every single time he pitches, I'm like, every pitch is a balk. Every pitch is a balk. And Dylan Cease does it now too. Dylan Cease, clearly it works for him, so I'm not hating on it. But he is now doing this thing where he gets his call and then just continues to be moving his glove. And I don't know if you know this, but he bobs his head the entire time before he pitches the ball now. It's really, so it's part of his like saying yes to the sign. And then he's just still saying yes, even when he's looking at runners at second. If he's got to pick someone off or looking over his shoulder, he's bobbing his head.
I guess technically head movements are
no,
allowed.
but he's bringing he's flipping
but
his
if he's
glove
moving
the
his hands
entire
too,
time he's
yeah.
doing.
I mean, it should not be allowed at all.
It's so strange. I mean, I got balks called on me where I feel like I would breathe in the wrong direction, and they would say, "Oh, that's a balk." And
I had a
nowadays, it's
guy
like they're not even
called
real.
when I was coaching. One of my players, one of my pitchers, got called for balk, and I go, "What? What did he do? I never saw him move. You know, ask him what happened. I mean, it wasn't a close game. We were way ahead. It wasn't an argumentative thing. I just wanted to know." And he said he had his hands too low. Now, I've seen major league pitchers, and so have you, whose set position is anywhere from the groin to the face. And the rules say in front of your body, including your face. Now, that's major league rules. We operated under Ohio High School Athletic Association rules, which could be different, but I still don't believe it. I looked up umpire sites. I've just did it today again to make sure that it hasn't snuck in there about the hands. The guy was saying you had to have your hands at least at just like letters, and that doesn't make sense. I think it makes sense that you want them there really, because then there's less movement and less time for the batter to adjust or the runner to adjust on your movement. But you see major league players right in front of their face. Garrett Crochet, you can't even see his face when he's in a set
Oh
position.
yeah, that seems like that's
and anywhere down to just a very relaxed down at the groin, just hanging. As long as your hands are together and the ball's in there, it can even be in your mitt, not your glove. It doesn't matter as long as your hands are together. So I never understood that one. Now you can't go down and have your arms just hanging down belt level or below, and then bring them up to your chest, because that's a double set. That's illegal. That's a balk. But he never suggested this kid was doing that. He just saying his hands are too low. I thought, what?
too low.
I never heard it before or since. I have no idea, and why that particular umpire on that particular day with that particular pitcher on that particular pitch decided the hands were too low. I have no idea, but I don't.
My guess on that would be on the previous pitch, the pitcher threw the ball right in the zone. The ump called it a ball, and the pitcher gave a look like, I don't know about that. So then the umpire was like, "Your hands are too low. Your hands are too low. That's a balk." And then, of course, he's correct in assuming none of us have read the rules. So he could just say, "Oh, it says in the rule book, you can't have your hands that low." That's crazy to me, because a very common place for pitchers to start through my entire lifetime is to have the hands sort of cradling, resting below the hips, like sort of in the groin area.
Yeah, just
I've never
kind of
heard
straight
of such a thing.
straight down, just lying there very nice and loose.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing. That's crazy.
I hadn't before or since, and
but
we did,
man,
we just
the pros
say it wasn't a close game. We just laughed about it, but
it's one of those things where, you know how every year in the NBA there's like a new way to not travel while you're headed to the hoop. Like somehow I'm seeing like 42 steps, but somehow someone else is seeing 2 or 3.
And the NBA, you can hop in something like a Mini Cooper.
Yeah.
And drive to the hoop in that.
But I feel like that is our balking in Major League Baseball now. These guys are doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and yet they almost never get called for a balk. And now we're at a point where we're going to intentionally balk. It's so strange. But I actually, to finish up on that topic, I think it's pretty smart. I think it's a smart move, because this starting with the runner on second thing is so freaking stupid. And of course, we're going to not see it in the playoffs. I believe they won't do it in the playoffs. I don't think you start with someone on. So it's not something that we have to think about later in key moments of, oh, do you balk the guy over in the ALCS? No, you don't. But I think it is a really interesting thing. It's a smart move.
What did they do? Did Jason say what they specifically do? I mean, there are many, many, many balk moves, some of which do not get called, as we've just discussed, never get called. I guess the most blatant one would be to stand on the rubber, come to your set position, just drop the ball. That one, got a call.
I'm sure it can even be anything of like coming up and then just faking a throw to home. That's a balk. You can't do that. So I haven't actually seen this happen, I don't think. But I very much trust Benetti to have observed it.
Sure.
And he went in depth about it. It wasn't like, oh, he saw it once and he was like, no, this is a thing people are doing now. And I actually love it. I think as a pitcher, there's nothing more distracting and frustrating than having a runner on second. I don't know why. Having a runner on first, especially at my level, which was not, high level baseball, um, having a runner on first, you should be most concerned about that because people steal on you almost every time at that level, unless you have a good catcher, which ours was fine, Michael Murphy, if you're listening. But they're most likely gonna steal on you at some point. But having a runner on second was just always it's so distracting because you completely take your eyes off the target in the process of getting ready to throw. That check in at second base is so weirdly distracting and detrimental, even though they're probably not going to steal third because you only needed a mediocre catcher to catch guys stealing at third base. I think it's a great move. If I was in a low leverage situation, had a comfortable lead, I would actually go back to those times pitching in high school and I would bulk those guys over to third. Because then if you're right-handed, you're looking right at them and you can wind up again. And I know a lot of pitchers actually prefer to throw from the stretch now, but I was always a wind-up guy because my mechanics were 100% stolen from watching tape of Pedro Martinez. And I watched the windup over and over and over and over, and I just wanted to do the windup. I hated pitching from the stretch. So any chance I could get to be in the windup instead, I honestly, if a guy got on and we had a lead, I didn't care if he scored if it got me back to the windup because I just didn't want to throw in the stretch. My chances of giving up more hits from the stretch are just way more likely. So I'm on board with the intentional bulk. You heard it here. I think intentional bulking should become a part of this game. I hope they get rid of the shift before they get rid of the intentional bulk because
Well, the
I
next
do
step,
like it.
though, there's a next step, and that's where the batting team, declines the bulk.
Yes, right. It's true, and maybe they should be allowed to do that. But of course, then they're stealing signs. If they're ever like, I don't want to go to third, then it's like, see, you're stealing them, you jerk, you bastard. Which of course is completely legal to do it that way. I mean, if you can pick up on the signs and relay them to the batter,
if you can read them yourself from second base, that's fine.
I do think that a lot, and I'll be interested to hear what you think. I do think that a lot of these guys, and this is when I had this thought. Eloy was on second the other day, and they just kept having to reboot their signs. And I just thought, man, you guys are putting so much faith in the intellect of Eloy Jimenez standing on second base that not only can Eloy decipher the signs, but get the sign to the batter in time. I just think Eloy is on second base thinking, baseball's cool. I love being on second. Baseball's so fun. I'm going to try to score if I can. Hope I don't get hurt. But if I do, whatever. I feel like that's Eloy's inner monologue at second base. And yet we're cycling through 8 different types of signs because Eloy could be stealing them. I just don't know that that many guys are.
No, let us know you're not knocking Eloy's intelligence factor. He has intelligence.
No,
Just his mind is elsewhere, as it should be.
Yeah, I'm sure and just the speed involved in having to relay these things. I just think Eloy is having too much fun. I think a lot of guys on second are actually thinking about not getting picked off of second and what they're going to do on the next play. That focusing really hard to try to decipher what a guy has up against his crotch from 120 feet away. I just don't know how much of it is happening, and I could be totally wrong. So, what do you think? Do you think there's that much accurate sign stealing coming from base runners at second and relaying them to the batter in time?
Well, you often hear an announcer, and I think both Stoney and Jason will say this, and announcers and national announcers or whatever, that they're particularly leery of a catcher on second base, which makes sense.
The catcher makes sense because a catcher is also not going to lead off much, is probably not going to score on anything but a double. So the catcher really actually could focus a lot more on what's going on at home plate and has the knowledge of, how the intricacies of all those sign systems likely work. But really, anyone else,
And of course, nobody, I think, is going to leave their catcher on second base in a top of the 10th situation when they could pinch run instead. So,
100%. Yeah, you're absolutely not leaving a catcher out there. I don't know, and it could be left over. It could be like a sort of PTSD from the Astros and their HD cameras and trash cans. And I know that this has always been a thing, that runners stealing signs at second has always been a thing forever,
oh yeah,
and it's all about how to avoid them. Uh, but it's just interesting to me that it seems like teams are extremely paranoid about it now, to the point that they're balking guys intentionally. I mean, does that seem right to you? I really I think about this a lot whenever there's a runner on second and
at,
they're
at, at,
so
at
hung
the
up on
at the amateur end of uh, the whole lineup here, down way down from the major leagues into the amateurs, teen amateurs. I once had an opposing manager come over to me, nice guy, and he said, "You might want to tell your catcher that he should put his signs a little higher up, because from where I'm coaching at third, I can see his fingers."
Yeah. And you know what? I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to be paranoid about, is a young 13-year-old catcher putting his fingers in the wrong place for the signs. I'm not as concerned. These sign combinations, I see Yasmani's hands down there when there's a guy on second going. And for those of you who can't see this, I am making 8 million gestures with my hands right now before the pitcher says, "Yes, I know what you said." And I'm like, "Really? You know what he just called? This is incredible." And then they're worried about the guy on second knowing. And I'm like, how the heck could he possibly know? How does he even know what Grandal was doing with his hands all the way down there? I'm watching it in HD from the comfort of my couch, and I can't tell you what's going on. But these guys they're also pros for a reason, and they have years and years of experience of deciphering these things. But it just seems weird to me. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all the time we have for this week. Do you got any final thoughts for us, Geezer, as we head forward? We're headed, got a couple more games against Oakland, and then Boston is coming to town.
And then after that, basically the season's over except for pretty much gimmies. So
yeah, which is really great. It's really nice, and well, it'll be interesting to see what kind of damage we can do to Boston. We're gonna have Chris Sale, I think, on Sunday.
I think so.
And he's a lefty, and we eat lefties, so it would be very nice to give Chris
We don't
Sale
eat really good lefties, though.
but
mediocre lefties we destroy.
Well, let's hope he brings it. Brings his mediocre stuff. But yeah, we'll be back next week to talk about all the games we're playing against AAA teams for the remainder of the season. You got one last thing to say? I see. It looks like
happy birthday!
Oh yes, and a very happy Frank Thomas 35th to the West Coast Southsider. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will talk to you next time on Sharing Sox.